We are 6 films into the Godzilla franchise now, and so far each film has represented a significant first, whether it be the first time Godzilla appeared in colour, the first time he fought another monster, or the first appearance of King Ghidorah. However, Invasion of Astro-Monster will always be most remembered for being the one where Godzilla dances, something I'll be talking about later. The film opens with Ifukube's amazing military march theme, or at least a variation of it. UFOs and satellite dishes make it clear that this is another sci-fi Godzilla movie involving extraterrestrials. A recently discovered planet orbiting Jupiter has been found to be emitting radio waves. 2 astronauts head to Planet X, where they quickly discover they are not the only forms of life there. Humanoid beings offer protection to them. As they head underground, they are briefed on the dangers of surface living. A huge monster terrorizes the planet, and the beings are forced to live underground. The natives are more than happy to show their nemesis to their new Terran friends, and it looks decidedly familiar. What they call Monster Zero is better known on our world as King Ghidorah. The Planet X people explain that they have already used their resources trying to destroy the creature, and there's nothing more they can do. However, they have an idea. Well, it's more of a trade. They want to borrow Godzilla and Rodan to defeat the 3-headed beast. The astronauts are sent back home with orders to report back on the proposition, to swap Godzilla and Rodan in return for a cure for cancer and intergalactic friendship. As usual, Ishiro Honda directs the film, but the film seems to take on a slightly different look. Maybe it's because of the addition of alien tech, but either Honda or cinematographer Hajime Kozumi seem inspired in Invasion of Astro-Monster with some wonderfully framed shots and some unique angles to the monster action. More on that later. Check out this great shot here where a scene of the rocket flying through space transitions to a restaurant scene featuring the sister of one of the astronauts. Nice. All that space action still feels very Godzilla, with the usual big 4 involved: Tanaka and Honda producing and directing, Tsuburaya and Ifukube visual effects and score. The film is in safe and familiar hands. The film packs in some of the usual things we've come to expect from a post-war Japanese monster movie. Though not a central focus, there is a reference made to the use of hydrogen bombs, and a speech makes reference to the shame we should feel over the conflicts on planet Earth. Post-war paranoia is exploited in an effective way through the use of emergency broadcasts. There's a palpable sense of danger and collective panic. As before, social progression featuring young lovers continues. Haruno, the film's strong female lead, is a character dealing with old-fashioned notions of male permission. Her brother refuses to give approval for her to be engaged to her boyfriend, an act which makes her brother not the most likable of people. He comes across as a bully and perhaps undermines some of the heroic astronaut vibes he's meant to have. He's played by Toho legend Akira Takarada. This is his 3rd Godzilla movie. His fellow astronaut is played by Nick Adams. This film was a Japanese-American co-production, and Adams' lines are all delivered in English and then dubbed into Japanese. In the American release of the film, his lines were obviously kept as they were, and everything else dubbed around it. There was a big market for redistributed monster movies in America, but they were often re-edited to try and squeeze in an American actor, like the original Gojira. However, this was created with an American actor already in place to make distribution in the USA much easier. You'd expect that the language difference would be jarring, but Adams fits well in the film, and despite the dubbing in this Japanese version, still comes across as charismatic. Tsuburaya's miniatures are once again incredible, as we've come to expect. A lot of the action takes place on Planet X, which is essentially a rocky terrain, but it looks believable. He takes the classic flying saucer and makes it into something special. They have the generic flying saucer shape, but instead of a grey metal finish, they look almost ceramic, with a pleasing iridescence. If you're a fan of 50s and 60s B-movies, then you'll have seen wobbly flying saucers, but Tsuburaya's move with grace. They don't clumsily dangle and swing in the sky. They have fluid, smooth movements, and do things which must have been technically challenging. Look at this scene where a UFO flies into a tunnel. It's a genuinely brilliant sequence. The way they splash and disrupt water appears as natural interactions with the landscape. When a flying saucer lasers the edge of a cliff to get to Rodan, it looks as convincing as any modern CGI effect. In addition to alien tech, we have numerous vehicles. They look brilliant too. In fact, they're so good that the same sequences are repeated throughout the film. I'm pretty sure that some shots are from previous films too, but that doesn't detract from this one. The cars and vans move naturally along the road. In this scene, you can see how they are running along a track. but in most scenes, this is obscured, and I only noticed because I'm obsessed with how they do stuff and actively looking for that sort of thing. There's one type of vehicle with numerous moving parts, and it all looks great. There are strings, but they're not obvious, and they certainly wouldn't have been visible on older transfers of the film. I've mentioned the UFOs, but the rocket looks amazing too. It has a metallic look to it rather than looking like a cheap toy. Initially, it just hangs in the sky, presumably as a matte painting, but eventually we see moving parts which make it look intricate. There's also a scene using miniature models to show the lift on the rocket, and it gives a grand sense of scale, although it does seem a little ominous that they descend holding weapons. There's some movement in the models too, which makes the cut between live action and models look pretty seamless. The rocket even has flames when needed, and looks awesome when it lands. I have to say that this science base, for want of a better term, looks amazing. It's one of my favourite miniature sets from a Godzilla film. The satellite dishes and the entire base look so articulate and detailed. Tsuburaya has crafted a completely believable landscape. The wide range of Earth and alien equipment was crafted with acute detail. They act as embellishments which allow the film to transcend any flaws, and there are flaws. It's eventually revealed that those pesky zillions have double-crossed us Earthlings. They've been on Earth for years, and can control Godzilla, Rodan and King Ghidorah. It's a kaiju-sized plot hole we ought not to think too hard about, because it means the entire first hour of the film was completely unnecessary. Anyway, the fight scenes have become an issue in Godzilla films. The idea of massive monsters fighting is appealing, but it's not easy to execute. The last film, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, suffered from some poor fight scenes, which felt a little underwhelming, and this sequel suffers much the same. The first fight scene lasts about 2 minutes, and features some rock throwing, some rock kicking, and some rock dropping. Godzilla then uses the lower gravity to launch himself into King Ghidorah, and that's it, battle over. Godzilla is so pleased that this happens. It's one of the most infamous moments in Godzilla film history, and probably one of the most repeated in online videos, along with Godzilla's flying kick in Godzilla vs. Megalon. Although Honda was not happy at having a kaiju act in silly ways, Tsuburaya wanted the monsters to have more character and appeal to children. He and the studio anthropomorphized the monsters. We've seen it in the last few films, but it's most obvious here. Even when the rocket leaves Godzilla and Rodan stranded on one of Jupiter's moons, they look depressed, and we feel sorry for them. The second fight sequence is much grander in scale. The truth is, the monster-on-monster action is still limited and oddly comical. Godzilla boxes King Ghidorah, mirroring the sort of legwork we'd see from a boxer in the ring, while Rodan pulls King Ghidorah's tail. This is slapstick entertainment. It's played for laughs, not an epic battle. Especially the tag team duo of Rodan and Godzilla, when Rodan picks Godzilla up and lifts him onto King Ghidorah, or Godzilla's reaction to getting zapped by King Ghidorah. Thankfully, it's during the battles that Tsuburaya's work transforms the film from childish monster melees into impressive scenes of mass destruction. There are moments in the film which are quite breathtaking. At one point, a satellite dish is targeted by a flying saucer. The dish looks huge. Once attacked, it buckles and starts to fold in on itself, reminiscent of the melting pylon in 1954's Gojira. I've watched this same scene several times to take in the impressive work. An equally impressive scene involves a bridge. In the previous film, there's the mediocre destruction of a bridge which simply topples over like a cheap toy, but here we see the metal twist and the fittings are ripped away. The low-level detail is staggering, and it adds drama to a film which otherwise would just be a cheap-ass B-movie. Much like Mothra in the previous films, we see Rodan fan his wings to create strong gusts. The force of the winds cause destruction and rip down roof tiles in a sequence that looks superb. There's lots of great interaction with the landscape, and we see shots we've not really seen before, of feet crashing through buildings and Godzilla's tail dragging over the rubble. This is a unique perspective. The houses are very detailed, and wood is splintered and walls explode as the clawed foot of Godzilla tears through the structure. This gives a much bigger scale to the kaiju, and it's also just pretty interesting to see. We're used to seeing wide shots of monsters walking through buildings, and there are some great wide shots here, but this close-up gives a human eye view of what's happening. I mentioned before that vehicle shots are reused throughout the film, well so are action shots, but as they're pretty quick-paced, it's not that obvious and the film gets away with it. But it does mean that sometimes you might see a building like this mobile oil depot get destroyed, only to see that same building appear later on and get destroyed again. The three monsters were in the previous film, and they look pretty much the same apart from Godzilla, whose suit is less sculpted and looks a bit shapeless. I suspect this was done to make the quick human-like movements easier, and to allow for a more emotive performance as Godzilla becomes more of a character. The Godzilla suit certainly takes a beating though, and suit actor Haruo Nakajima suffers for his art when the Big G takes a projectile to the face. In the midst of this weirdly conceived concept, the visuals are brilliantly executed through genuine care, craftsmanship, and attention. The Zillion scheme is clearly bonkers. King Ghidorah, the ultimate monster, is defeated so easily, but the efforts made for the visual effects carry the film once again and make sure that the silly aspects don't quite drag it down, like this mental scene where all three kaiju are laid twitching on the ground. This manages against considerable odds to be an entertaining watch. Tsuburaya is responsible for much of what is great about this film, but is also a big part of the family-friendly change of direction which Ishiro Honda felt was not respectful to the genre. It's obvious that Toho are aiming Godzilla at a different audience now compared to the 1954 film. This is the fourth Godzilla film in 4 years, and there'd been 9 more over the next decade. The end of the golden age of Japanese cinema and the preponderance of television sets saw Toho's film budget slashed, and Godzilla would soon find himself restricted to island-based antics, with less need for expensive miniature sets. This film acts as a decent, if not quite solid, follow-up to Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Godzilla was once an analogy of the horrors of war, but children were now growing up with Godzilla as a fun mascot in full-colour monster movies, and Toho were quite happy to provide what the audience was eager to consume.